This is Euronews Tonight. Here are your top stories. The devastation of Mariupol. The mayor says more than 2,000 civilians have been killed as Russian forces continue to bear down on the strategic port city. Ahead of peace talks in Turkey, President Zelensky says he's now ready to discuss neutrality, but insists that the sovereignty of Ukraine remains a priority.
Russia increases its crackdown on independent media at home and abroad as it tries to control the Ukraine war narrative.
And Coda takes the Oscar for Best Picture, but the shock of the night was Will Smith slapping comedian Chris Rock after he made a joke about the actor's wife. I'm Helena Humphrey. Good to have you with us. As the war in Ukraine enters its second month, the city of Mariupol remains a major battleground, with the Russian army pushing inwards to capture the port city. So far, Ukrainian forces have managed to hold off Russia's attack while under heavy bombardment from the skies. Tens of thousands of residents have fled the war zone, but reports say over 150,000 more remain. And for those people, the conditions are horrendous: a shortage of food, water and medical supplies. Here's how one refugee described the situation for those who can't get out.
There is lack of food, there is no drinking water, there is no medicine. A lot of people are just, I think, starving to death in their apartments right now with no help. The situation in Mariupol is just horrific. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's a mass murder that's happening at the hands of the Russians. The estimated number, I think, is very low of civilians that are trapped in the city. The official number is about 100,000 to 200,000. I think it's closer to 300,000.
Well, across the country, the battle rages on, with losses accumulating on both sides. Ukraine looks to have stopped Russia's advance, but now Moscow is capitalizing on its air superiority. Rebecca Daunt reports.
Ukrainian fuel depots bursting into flames are being seen more and more regularly. But as Russia continues to battle Ukraine's fierce resistance to the invasion, Moscow has been forced to change its strategy. President Putin's army is entering a war of attrition, which it hopes to win by force of destruction. A French television crew captured these images near Mykolaiv after the withdrawal of Russian troops. Farms, machinery and homes appear to have been destroyed in an assault on Bashtanka.
It was my house. All the houses here were destroyed and the people left. This is the worst that could happen to us.
According to Russia's defense ministry, its forces have downed multiple Ukrainian Air Force planes in the Chernihiv, Rybka and Horodnya regions respectively. Spokesperson Igor Konashenkov claims his army destroyed 19 aircraft between Sunday and Monday, 2 of which were fighter jets. While the death toll continues to rise on both sides, the exact number of lives claimed by the war is difficult to verify. Although peace talks between Russian and Ukrainian delegations have so far failed to end an agreement, officials have landed in Istanbul for another round of negotiations, scheduled for Tuesday and Wednesday.
Well, monitoring the situation across the country, and joining me here in the studio is our correspondent, Sasha Vakulina. Sasha, it's good to see you. We just heard in that report that the heavy toll this is taking on the civilian population, in particular cities as well. So just talk me through some of the places that are really coming under the hardest attacks.
These would be the places and the regions starting from the north of the country. This is towards the border with Belarus. Then we go towards Chernihiv, Sumy, towards the east of the country that goes with Luhansk and Donetsk regions, and towards the south, towards Mariupol and all the Azov Sea coast, of course, because this is the southern route towards Crimea, the only land one that could be possible, and this is why those areas are being attacked that much. According to the latest statistics and the information that we have, Russian troops did not make any significant gains in the territory, and somehow they, over the weekend, what we've seen, that they changed the strategy as they're trying to regroup and see how it goes, and they went into the heavy shelling of the fuel storages all over the country. That what we saw in Kiev, in Lviv, in Lutsk over the weekend. Now, when it comes to Ukraine, Ukraine is now defending and also trying to counterattack, and we've seen some of these Ukrainian troops regaining some territory in Mykolaiv region. This is, of course, the key region to move for the Russian troops from Kherson towards Odessa. and also right around Kiev. And now, as of this afternoon, we've heard from the mayor of Irpin that the town of Irpin has been liberated. This is around 20 kilometers northwest of Kiev, somewhere with the heaviest fighting that we have seen, and still some fighting happening there in the region. But as of now, Irpin has been liberated and taken by Ukrainian forces.
So we've got Irpin being liberated, and then I did also hear the mayor of Mariupol saying today that that city must be evacuated immediately. So tell us a little bit more about, what we're seeing there. It looks like a dire humanitarian situation.
It does, and it gets really worse and worse every hour and every day. As you said, there are more than around 160,000 people still in Mariupol. They cannot leave the town for the moment. They don't have anything to live on, no food, no electricity, no water, and the conditions are really horrible. And the big problem is that every day over the past couple of weeks, Ukraine tried to open humanitarian corridors. That was really different with Mariupol. They did not really work, but today it got even worse, because today all the humanitarian corridors in Ukraine are not working. We heard from the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, Irina Vereshchuk, who said that they do have the intel information that there might be provocations from Russia on those routes that are defined as humanitarian corridors from some of the besieged cities. These are from the regions of Sumy, Kiev region, Chernihiv region, let alone Mariupol. So this is why today, this is the first day over the past week or 2 weeks when we have no humanitarian corridors open in Ukraine.
It's an alarming development, as you say. Talking more broadly about the strategy, is a new strategy emerging? Because we also heard from Ukrainian intelligence reports suggesting that Russia was looking at splitting the country in two, I guess in a crude comparison to North and South Korea.
Well, that's it. This is one of these ideas that have been circulating these days. Of course, the second month of the full-scale war is in Ukraine, and the attempts by Russia to take over Ukraine, to get to Kiev, they did not really happen, as we see. So they do have some positions, as they have at the bordering regions, and they're trying to stay there. They're trying to fix themselves and to stay there in those regions, of course, also with Ukraine defending and counterattacking. Zelensky's advisor commented on this today, this afternoon, Alexander Rodnyansky. He said that there will be no question about territorial integrity of Ukraine. This is off the table for Ukrainians at the negotiations now and in the future.
All right, an excellent summary. Sasha Vakulina, thank you so much for bringing it to us. Well, President Zelensky says that Ukraine's territorial sovereignty remains a priority ahead of a new round of peace talks with Russia in Istanbul on Tuesday. Zelensky doubled down on his negotiation priorities despite previous comments suggesting he was ready to compromise on contested areas in the east. Well, Ukraine's leader has called for face-to-face talks with President Putin to secure peace without delay. But Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says that the leaders will only meet in person once key elements of a potential deal are agreed. Well, for more, let's bring in our Russia correspondent, Galina Polenskaya. Galina, good evening to you. Talking about peace talks in the past, they didn't really seem to yield any significant developments. Are we getting any closer to that moment when perhaps President Zelensky might sit down with President Putin face to face?
Well, for now, I'm afraid I would say no, we are not getting any closer. Today, the Kremlin made it clear that Russia does not see such a meeting as something that could happen in the nearest future. At this point, President Putin's spokesman said that there was no progress on a meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, and Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov was even more precise. He said that if such a meeting takes place right now, it would be, as he said, counterproductive, and he said that it should be better prepared. So all of those statements were made just before this new round of Ukraine peace talks, which is going to start in Turkey, in Istanbul, and there were some reports that the negotiators will start talking tomorrow in the morning. It's going to be a very, very difficult round. Again, President Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, said that the talks must bring peace and it has to be immediate, and he made some statements. He signaled willingness to discuss some very sensitive topics like the neutrality of Ukraine, but the Kremlin's assessments ahead of those talks were much more grim. The Kremlin spokesperson said that he could not talk about any progress concerning those negotiations.
Well, Galina, talking, I guess, about wider diplomatic efforts, we've been hearing from the G7, essentially rejecting Putin's demand to pay for Russian gas in rubles. We've also been hearing from Russia reacting to what it calls unfriendly nations now with concrete measures. Talk us through them.
Well, actually, Russia is preparing to restrict the entry for the citizens of the unfriendly states into Russia. And Sergei Lavrov announced the news saying that a presidential decree was already being prepared. So this restriction will probably be imposed very, very soon. And you know, this list of the unfriendly states is the list of those countries who imposed those joint sanctions on Russia. And of course, it's the European Union countries, the G7 countries, let's say. And earlier, President Putin decided that now those unfriendly states, if they want Russian gas, they will have to pay it for in rubles, so they will have to buy those rubles for euros, let's say, inside Russia. And Russia is standing where it is. The Russian Central Bank is going to prepare this procedure by this Thursday. President Putin's spokesman was asked, what if they don't pay? What if they reject? And we heard that they think that it is against the contract. And Dmitry Peskov said that, well, Russia is not willing to supply gas for free. So we might see the next step is that there will be just shortages of Russian gas, that Russia will just stop supplying gas to Europe.
All right, that would be the next stage. Galina Polanskaya, as ever, thank you very much. Well, one of Russia's leading independent newspapers has announced that it has suspended reporting on the war in Ukraine following pressure from the Kremlin. Let's find out more from Matthew in the Cube.
Indeed, Helena, Russia is continuing its swift crackdowns as it tries to control the narrative about the war in Ukraine. On Monday, the Novaya Gazeta newspaper announced that it would be suspending its activities on social media, online and in print after it received a second warning from Russia's state communications watchdog. Novaya Gazeta was one of the leading newspapers in the country, independent newspapers. It has been reporting on corruption and human rights abuses in Russia for nearly 30 years, and its editor-in-chief was last year jointly awarded with the Nobel Peace Prize. Since the start of the war in Ukraine, it has defied Moscow by continuing its independent reporting. But in recent weeks, it has had to remove a number of materials to comply with Russia's controversial new law on so-called fake news. Well, this latest decision to suspend activities came after the newspaper was accused of failing to refer to an NGO as a foreign agent, something it has to do under Russian law. The editor-in-chief said that this was a terrible but necessary decision to protect Novaya Gazeta's staff. And the newspaper has become the latest in a long list of independent media outlets and organisations across Europe that have been restricted or even outright banned in Russia since the start of what the Kremlin refers to as a special military operation. And indeed, Helena, on Monday, two German newspapers, Deutsche Welle and Bild, were also targeted with new restrictions. So as the war continues to wage on the ground in Ukraine, you can see that the information war is waging just as fiercely online as well.
The European Union's Justice and Home Affairs ministers are discussing how to facilitate the travel of Ukrainian refugees to the bloc's nations and how much funding they'll need to do that. More than 3.8 million people have already fled Ukraine. That's according to the UN's refugee agency, UNHCR. And that number, well, it is set to increase. So let's go over to Shona Murray in Brussels for more on this. Good to see you, Shona. What did they manage to come up with?
Well, they've really been discussing, as you mentioned, they're coordinating amongst member states how to alleviate the pressure on entry countries like Poland, like Slovakia, like Romania, where refugees are actually coming directly from Ukraine. As you mentioned there, I mean, there's 3.8 million, but about 2 million have gone to Poland alone. So member states can then take on some of those refugees into more central parts of Europe, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, and so on. There's also coordination around the vulnerabilities from those refugees, the requirement for medical care, for psychological care, and also to ensure that children who are unaccompanied, because there are many of them, don't fall into the hands of child traffickers. And I caught up with Stephanie Pope from Oxfam, and she talked about what really needs to be taken into consideration by these ministers today.
What's also important in parallel is that EU countries massively scale up their reception capacities to ensure that all those who arrive, including families and children, have access to safe accommodation that is also child-friendly and gender-sensitive. These people will also need referrals to basic services as well as psychosocial support. Unaccompanied children will also need access to guardianship networks.
That's Stephanie Pope there from Oxfam making the point that member states really need to step up to ensure that they have enough facilities in place for the number of refugees, which are, as you mentioned there, increasing from that 3.8 million figure.
As you say, Shona, that is a critical point to make, especially when it comes to guaranteeing people's welfare as well, arriving in new countries. And Poland taking the majority of refugees so far. They're also starting to feel the challenge of that now. Today in Brussels, that meeting spoke about the idea of self-relocation that was raised. Do we know anything more about how that might work?
We don't know that yet, but the point has been made indeed that the point of entry countries are reaching the limit as to what they can do, and obviously there needs to be a strong level of burden sharing from all member states. And I think there is a consensus in the EU, unlike the refugee crisis in 2015, 2016, and just recently the Afghanistan situation, that member states will take in more refugees. And given the temporary protective scheme that the EU allows refugees to work, attend school and so on, it's a little bit easier. But certainly in terms of the relocation scheme, that hasn't been necessarily confirmed yet, but that may be something that has to be looked at in the coming weeks and months. Helena?
All right, Shona Murray in Brussels. Thanks for that, Shona. Famous Attractions has finally reopened its doors to tourists after being closed for 2 years due to the pandemic, as Rebecca Daunt reports.
Spring has finally sprung at Kokenhof Botanical Garden, the largest and most famous estate in the Netherlands. Dating back to the 15th century, the park opened its gates to the public in 1950 and became an instant success. And after a 2-year pause due to the coronavirus pandemic, the park is once again open to visitors.
It's really good to come out again in such a beautiful place like this. I've not travelled for a long time.
Yeah, we're glad to be here. We're from the United States, and it's good to be travelling again. And I guess this is the second day that the flower park is open, and it's gorgeous seeing all the beautiful flowers.
The grounds boast 7 million flowers, including daffodils, hyacinths, imperial crowns and, of course, tulips. The 73rd edition of the exhibition is themed Flower Classics and showcases prints from the Dutch Golden Age, such as Girl with a Pearl Earring by master painter Vermeer.
It's absolutely amazing to see so many people from all over the world already in the park. So yeah, we are happy, the gardeners is happy, everyone is happy that we are open again.
The 32-hectare park in Lize, some 32 kilometres from Amsterdam, was designed by landscapers Jan David Zoker and son Louis Paul Zoker, the men behind Amsterdam's renowned Vondelpark. For €19, these brightly coloured displays can be explored on foot or by bike. Rebecca Daunt, Euronews.
A much needed sight there. You're up to date. See you soon.